Welcome back. Well, let's bring in Thursday's View from the Hill. Karina Gould is a Liberal MP. I think you're Parliamentary Secretary too, aren't you? Yes. Shannon Stubbs is a Conservative MP from Alberta. Daniel Blakey is an NDP MP from lovely Manitoba. Welcome to you all. The Morneau issue keeps churning along here on this funding and these financing pay for access allegations. But even today, though, the ethics commissioner called them unsavory, and the lobbyist commissioner said that she's investigating a connection between a lobbyist who organized one of these fundraisers. And so the swirl continues. The question I want to ask you people is that Ontario has just basically outlawed politicians attending these type of fundraisers. Trudeau has said the perception, even the perception, is wrong. What's wrong with Ontario going the Ontario route and just saying you can't go anymore? Shannon?
Well, I think it's a legitimate role for government relations advocates to play on behalf of organizations and clients who want to impact public policy. The issue is that this is really about the decision-making and the ethics, I think, about the politicians. And so a minister shouldn't be accepting an invitation or participating in a fundraiser that is billed as gaining access to him and or her in order to directly impact the portfolio or the issue for which they're responsible. And as you noted, the Prime Minister himself issued this directive to his ministers that there should be no preferential access to government or the appearance of preferential access to government by stakeholders to impact public policy, which I think is a good directive. But you know, he's made the responsibility for enforcement of that directive fall under the Privy Council, and the Privy Council reports to him. So, yes. So I think Canadians can be forgiven for thinking that many of these instances are untoward, not acceptable.
All right, Daniel. It's not like, you know, they're lined up to meet NDP MPs yet. They'll be cabinet ministers one day, but is it unsavory, as the ethics commissioner says? And what's wrong with saying if it's unsavory and questionable, let's outlaw it?
Well, I think it obviously is questionable. So when your minister is the headliner for the event, for a government with a prime minister that issued a directive saying, you know, you won't even engage in events where there's the appearance of a conflict of interest, and you don't really need to change the rules. You just need the Liberal ministers to live up to the rules that the prime minister has already put in place. And obviously there is an enforcement issue because it should be someone independent who's enforcing those rules, and the prime minister chose not to do that. The rules are already in place. It's a matter of having people that care enough to follow the rules and who want to be above this kind of criticism. And clearly, we don't have a government that's willing to go there unless someone has the authority to tell them to. And that seems to me to
so,
be
Karina, we got good rules, we just have poor adherence to them.
Well, I want to go back to your initial question about whether or not we should follow Ontario's lead on this. And I think one thing that we're quite concerned about with the direction Ontario is taking is that it's actually putting fundraising even further into the back rooms, right? As it stands right now at the federal level, we have some of the strictest and most transparent rules that exist. Any individual that makes a donation over $200 goes online publicly for any Canadian to see. So you can actually tell, and these were rules that were put in place by the previous government that we think are strong rules and that we abide by as well. And so I think it's important to recognize that fundraising is an activity that all members carry out and that all members are governed by, and it's important for us, but it's also important for us to make sure that it's transparent, open, and accessible.
Because no one is contesting that people can donate to political parties and they can donate to MPs and MPs can do fundraising. It has to do with these particular MPs who are part of the government and ministers of the Crown and make serious decisions about how billions of dollars of government funding is directed. And so that's why there is a different standard for these ministers. So it's just not true to say, well, we can treat these ministers as if they're just any other MP. And it's also misleading, I think, to create the impression that critics of the government and these pay-to-play fundraisers are saying that there's a problem with the donation rules. There isn't a problem with the donation rules. There's a problem with the nature of government lobbying that's going on and the money that's clearly involved in that lobbying when you have ministers having lobbyists host fundraisers for them.
Right, and legislative and policy decisions by ministers shouldn't be determined by who can afford, $1,500 a ticket to pressure them on their particular priority. Nor should ministers be using, and this is an important distinction, I think, their government positions and the privilege of serving government, serving Canadians, in order to raise funds for their partisan political party.
Okay, let's move along. I think it's pretty exciting today. The Senate got 9 new members. The independents in the Senate are getting close to a controlling bloc. I guess, though, the question always is, what if the Senate, because it's independent and therefore not controllable by any of the political party leaders, what happens when they start rejecting legislation that's been passed by the elected House of Commons? Karina, do you see a day coming where this might be such a good thing, it turns out to be a bad thing because the elected people's will is thwarted somehow?
I don't, because I think that senators understand that their role is to be a place of sober second thought. I think we saw it very clearly in the spring when we passed the Bill C-14. So it went to the Senate. The Senate had some recommendations.
The
assisted dying bill, medical assistance in dying. They had some recommendations. They sent it back to the House. The House voted on what they would support, and it went back to the Senate, and the Senate approved it, right? Because they recognized the limits of their powers and of their authorities. And I think that's something that we'll see moving forward. And I think it is, as you said, very exciting to have an independent Senate that is there to really be that chamber of sober second thought. And with the individuals that were appointed today, I mean, they are very eminent Canadians that represent a diverse background, that come from different corners of our country, who really bring a lot of solid experience to the table.
I'm sure, Daniel, you beg to differ.
Well, I mean, I think the Liberals are hooked on the horn of a dilemma, because either you have a legislative chamber that comes and takes bills and ultimately passes them more or less as they were, in order to respect the fact that they don't have a mandate from the voters of Canada, or they go ahead and they take it upon themselves to start modifying laws that come out of a chamber with a mandate from the voters of Canada. So, I mean, either it's ineffective or it's inappropriate, and I think that's the deal you're stuck with.
That's a false dichotomy.
And to the idea that somehow we're getting better laws out of this, I don't know if Ms. Gould would go back to Ontario and say, if we want to have better laws, we should have a Senate where Kathleen Wynne gets to appoint all of the, or the Premier of the day gets to appoint all of the legislators in that second chamber. There's no one in Canada advocating for a Senate at the provincial level to get better laws in their province. If it's good enough in Manitoba and Ontario and BC and the Yukon, then it's good enough in Ottawa too.
Shannon?
Well, first of all, of course, it's the Prime Minister's constitutional prerogative to appoint senators, and so we look forward to working with them and watching them fulfill their roles. But you'll forgive me as an Albertan for mentioning this. There is a way that all of this can be avoided, that we can ensure that senators have a mandate from the people. There's a way that the transparency and accountability issues around spending can be addressed, and a way that senators can fulfill their legislative duties, which are sweeping and significant currently. They should be elected, and they should do it with the mandate of the people.
Okay, well, I knew that was coming. I knew what you were going to say anyway, so there you go. Let's move along quickly. The European Free Trade Deal went through. I didn't sense any disappointment in the House of Commons except from the NDP. What is the problem with this deal? It looks like you're opening up a market to 500 million people. Can't be anything but good for Canada. Yeah,
I mean, well, first of all, we don't know exactly what the nature of the changes are that we're told are happening, so you can't pronounce on things you haven't seen. But the agreement as it was has a number of problems, and I think the Wallonians were quite right to zero in on the investor state dispute settlement clauses. Those are clauses that have been in a number of deals, trade deals that Canada has signed, and essentially allow multinational corporations through international trade tribunals to overrule decisions that democratically elected governments make about environmental standards, health standards, safety standards, and I just have a problem with that. I don't think that's okay. Now, what I understand is that part of what Wallonia asked was for the European Court to weigh in on whether or not that would in fact be the case. I commend them for doing their due diligence and standing up for people in their region. I wish we'd see the same from the Canadian government.
And I'm sure you both think it's pretty good, and you probably think the Harper government did well to get it to the Trudeau government, the government level to get it passed. So all good. I'm not even very quickly.
Very quickly. I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that we've supported this deal from the beginning, but also we made important progress with our European counterparts to make this a more progressive deal, and that's why we see the Europeans on board and why it's going to be a great deal for Canada.
You guys did all the heavy lifting, right, Shannon?
Well, we're looking forward to seeing the final deal, and of course we wholeheartedly support free trade because it's critical to Canada's economy and to our long-term prosperity.
We're done. Well, thank you. We're out of time. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Coming up.